All right, Emily, we are live on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. We are so happy to see you. Thank you very much for joining us. And um, let's wait a few minutes. Just our viewers will receive notifications and join us. How are
Great.
you, Emily?
I'm good, thank you. I'm pretty excited. It's a big day for us.
Yes. Our viewers join us already. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining our session, and we hope all of you are doing great and well these days. And today we have the live program with the U.S. Embassy representative, Emilie Bruchon. And today you will learn more about how U.S. elections work. And please do not hesitate to ask your questions and leave your comments under this video in the comment section. And after the presentation, Emily will answer them. And now I would like to give the stage to Emily.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. As I said a minute ago, this is a pretty exciting day for Americans because this is election day. We have elections on a regular basis in the United States, but we have presidential elections only every 4 years. So it's been quite some time, and it'll be very exciting and interesting to see what happens in this year's elections. So I'm going to start by giving an overview of how the American elections work. They're quite different in some ways than elections in the Kyrgyz Republic. I learned that last month when I was an observer of the Kyrgyz elections, and I learned a lot about how your system works. And today I'm happy to give an overview of the American system. And I thank you very much in advance, Ida, for your help with the slides. So if you can go to the first slide, please. I'm going to talk about some basic questions about the 2020 elections. So as you know, as citizens of a democratic republic, free and fair elections are extremely important. Elections give citizens a voice in their government by letting them determine who governs. America became a democracy by fighting a war for its independence, the American Revolution, some 240 years ago. And so we have had about 230 years of American elections being run according to the United States Constitution. We have had peaceful transfer of power for a long time in the United States, due in large part to the system that we have in place. And so if you don't mind going to the next slide, please. The next slide talks about why elections are so important. And if we were all together in a classroom or a library, I'd ask you to give me your ideas. But like I already said, for me, the most important things are that elections help to decide who is in charge. Citizens have the power in a democracy. And of course, the peaceful transfer of power from one elected official to his or her successor. And also, of course, power passing from the citizens to their elected representatives when someone is chosen by the people and then sworn into office. So can we go to the next slide, please? I'd like to talk a little bit about who can vote in the United States, because it's changed quite a bit over the history of our nation. Today, the United States Constitution guarantees that all American citizens over the age of 18 can vote. And that's for elections at the national level, also at the state level, and at the local level. However, when George Washington was elected as the first president of the United States, which was in the year 1789, only about 6% of the United States population was eligible to vote. So in most of the original 13 states that started the United States of America, you could only vote if you were a man, if you owned land. So you had to be wealthy enough to own land. You had to be over the age of 21. And of course, there were no people who had been brought to America as slaves, for example, who owned land. And so it took many years. It took until, it took almost 90 years, 80 plus years for the, no, that's not right, 80 years for the American Constitution to be amended to say that people who had formerly been slaves had the right to vote. And even after the Constitution was amended to give people who had been brought from Africa, mostly against their will, they were brought to America as property, not as people, because they were seen as not having the same rights as people with European background. In those, when the Constitution was amended after the American Civil War, people who had been brought to America as slaves then had the right to vote on paper until the 20th century for them to actually be able to vote freely. I got a little distracted by that technical issue, but I think that we're back on track. So that would mean going to slide 5, please. I also was going to say that women in America only got the right to vote about 100 years ago. It was 100 years ago this fall. And so that's, that means that now a much greater percentage of the US population, of course, has the right to vote, which is good. We want as many people as possible to help participate in choosing our leaders. So the next basic question, why does the, hold on. I think we got off. So who votes? And then can you back up one more slide, please, Adam? I'm sorry, which public officials will be elected? Thank you. Yep. So like I said, this year is special for us because it's a presidential election. We have presidential elections only every 4 years. We have local elections on a regular basis. So that might be voting for the mayor. That might mean voting for members of the city council, something like that. Those elections happen on a regularly scheduled basis, and they play a very important role in the daily lives of American citizens. So we have local elections as part of today's elections in America. We also have state level elections. Each state in America is run by a governor, and governors in most states serve for 4 years, but in some states they serve for only 2 years. There are lots of other officials that are elected at the state level. My home state of North Carolina, for example, has a legislature. And so we have state senators and state representatives. And so most of them serve every 2 years or every 4 years. And then at the national level, we have other officials, of course, the president who runs with a vice presidential candidate, and the members of Congress. So the American Congress, like you probably know, it has 2 bodies. It has the Senate and it has the House of Representatives. And the House of Representatives has 435 members. Each state is given a certain number of members of the House of Representatives based on its population. And then the other part of the American Congress is the Senate. And we have 100 senators, 2 for each of the 50 states. And that's because the American Constitution was written and the American government was designed to give power to the people. And so the states with the biggest populations do have the most votes in the House of Representatives. And our government was also designed to protect the rights of minorities. And so it gives a lot of power at the state level as well. And so a state with a very small population, for example, Wyoming, has 2 senators, the same as the state of California, which has our largest population, but it still has only 2 senators. And that's to help make sure that the rights of the smaller states and the people who live in the smaller states are not taken advantage of by the larger states and the people in the larger states. So this year we have all the elections today in America. We have presidential elections, we have elections for the House of Representatives. All members of the House of Representatives serve only 2 years. We have 1/3 of the Senate up for re-election this year. We have many governors and of course many, many local officials. So this is a big day for American democracy. So if we could go to the next slide, please. It talks about political parties and why the United States has only 2 major political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. There are other political parties in the United States. If you're a big fan of American politics, then you've probably heard of the Libertarian Party, for example, maybe the Green Party. We do have other parties in America from time to time, but for many, many years, every president has come from, since 1852, every president has been either a Republican or a Democrat. And the way our system works is that the person who gets most of the votes wins. And that means that it's very hard for a small party. It would be very hard for a small party to ever get enough support to actually win. And often people say that small parties only play the part of hurting candidates from the major party that they are closest to in philosophy. So if, for example, the Democratic Party, I guess, is a center-left party, and you have the Green Party running as a far-left party, any votes that the Green Party sort of takes away from the Democratic Party are votes that the Democratic Party has no chance of winning, and therefore makes the Democrats more likely to lose to the other major party, the Republican Party. So while we do have more parties in America, we have only the 2 main ones because that's how our system works. It rewards the big parties with the big national base. However, it does not say in the Constitution, of course, that we have only 2 political parties. When the Constitution was written, there were not political parties at all. So if we can go to the next slide, please. It talks a little bit about how presidential candidates are chosen. The American presidential election of 2020 has been going on for quite a long time already. Because we have in America what's called primary elections, and then we have what's called general elections. And so the primary election is when candidates from one party compete against each other to get the nomination of their party or to be selected by their party as the preferred candidate. And so if you look at the 2020 election, the Republican Party did not have to have primaries because the current president, President Trump, is a representative of the Republican Party. And in America, presidents are limited to serving 2 times, 4 years, and then possibly 4 more years, and then they can't run again. But so when the president is from a particular party, they always run again for election if they are eligible to. So we had this year big Democratic primaries. Some states in a primary election is where voters from each state get to vote for which of the Republicans or which of the Democrats they want to be running for the general election. And so earlier in 2020, you had a lot of Democratic candidates competing against each other. Even last year, you had a lot of Democratic candidates competing against each other to get the Democratic presidential nomination. And of course, Joe Biden was selected, and he chose to be his campaign running mate, Kamala Harris. So that's who is on the Democratic ticket, as we say this year, who's running from the Democratic side. Most states have what we call primaries, which is an election, but just for the candidates from one party, the preliminary election. Some states have what's called a caucus, which is a little bit different. It works like a meeting. They're not as common. And then I put the word conventions here as well, because that's another thing you might notice. The Republican National Convention or the Democratic National Convention. Those always happen in the summertime before the presidential election. And the Republicans and the Democrats each officially choose their candidate. And usually they also adopt what we call a platform, which is they decide officially what policies their party supports. Usually we know before the convention who's going to be selected as the nominee from the parties, but not always. Okay, next slide, please. How do Americans vote? This year is very different than most years. The way that Americans usually vote is by most Americans go to stand at their polling place. So this could be a local school, for example, much like in Kyrgyzstan, and stand in line, show their identification card, and they get, then they have the chance to vote. Sometimes you do take a piece of paper and you fill in the bubble with a pen and you put it into a machine. When I saw voting happen last month here, that was what it looked like. And some places do that in America. A lot of places have a voting machine, which is like a computer where you just touch on the screen. Where I lived most recently in Virginia, we voted on using voting machines. But this year is very different because of the coronavirus pandemic and the fact that many people have chosen to vote by mail or just to vote early. Those are both options that have been expanded over time. So more and more people can use them now. And this year, more people than ever by far have used those options. So even though today is election day and people in America are just waking up, almost 100 million Americans have already voted. And that's because of it being possible to vote by mail and also to go to a polling place, but to vote early. Of course, you can only vote one time. Our system does have a lot of checks to make sure that happens. But so I voted this year by mail. I had to mail I took a paper ballot and I filled in the circles for the people I was voting for, and I mailed it last month, and I already have found out that it has been accepted. However, one thing that's interesting again this year is that most states don't start counting those mail-in ballots until Election Day. And so we have many million Americans who have voted by mail, and their ballots are not going to start getting counted until today, because that's what the laws of their home states say. So I know that my ballot was received, but my ballot has not been counted yet. And so if it takes us a long time this year to find out who has won the election, it will partly be because of coronavirus and because so many people chose to vote by mail. So that's an interesting dynamic for us. So one more question. Does the presidential candidate with the most votes always win? Thank you, Ida. So the presidential candidate with the most votes does not always win. This is a pretty unusual thing for a lot of people to understand. And we have a sort of strange and old-fashioned system in the United States called the Electoral College that was designed that way, of course, by the people who wrote the US Constitution. So when I filled out my ballot, my choices were Joe Biden, Donald Trump for president. But my votes will be counted. That we do have, of course, a way of counting the popular vote in America. But at the state level, we have a system in America called the Electoral College. It's a very strange name. It's not like a college or a university that you go to study at. It's a lot more like the United States House of Representatives or the United States Congress, really, because every state is assigned a certain number of electors who are the members of the Electoral College. And just like with our Congress, the number of electors or members of the Electoral College that each state has is based on a couple of different things. Basically, it's a very complicated system, so I'm giving the most simple explanation I can. But basically, every state has one number of electors that is based on its population. So again, you have California with the biggest population. It has the most electors. You have a state like Wyoming with very few. And so you have that. And then you also have, sort of as another check in our system, a minimum level of representation. And so what you have, thanks for going on to the next slide, is, this is the right place to be right now. Sorry, just to be clear. So you have a system in which every state has a number of votes. And for the president to be elected, the candidate has to get a majority of the votes in the Electoral College. So the Electoral College has 538 members. And so a majority of those is 270 votes. And so if you are really interested in American politics and you are watching the news reports as they become available about what's happening in the vote counting, you might see numbers that say, 5 million voted for Trump, 5 million voted for Biden, but you also will see Electoral College numbers. And the way to win the presidency is to get to 270. So it's quite complicated, and it does mean that there have been times in recent history when the winner of the popular vote, the person who got the most votes, people like me checking either Joe Biden or Donald Trump, when the person who got the most popular votes did not win the election because they did not get a majority of the votes in the Electoral College. To some people, that seems very strange and undemocratic. But again, it's designed that way to help make sure that our power is not too concentrated. A lot of the power stays at the state level. So we can talk more about the Electoral College in the questions if you want to. It really is rather complicated. But the most important thing to know is that I don't know, maybe the most important thing to know is that it's worked this way for a long time, and it seems to work pretty well on the whole. And that's why if you see 270 up on a television screen, that's why. So I have one more slide about this, if you don't mind going to the next slide. Like I said, each state has a number of electors that is based on its population, plus adding 2 for the 2 US senators. So a state like Wyoming with a tiny population has only 3 electors. And I think California had something, I already forgot, 55 or 58, something like that. So yeah, okay, so California has 55 electors, which is quite a lot. So next we'll talk a little bit, in a minute, we'll talk just a bit more about what this means in terms of strategy for the presidential candidates, because it's very interesting. I'm sure you've heard before about swing states and what swing states are. Actually, do you mind backing up, Ida? Because I could talk about that for a minute now. So if you look at a state like California, for example, California has 55 electors. That's California way over on the left-hand side of the, thank you very much. Yes, exactly. So California has the most electors. It would be a big prize for either candidate to win. But for whatever reason, the people of California lean heavily Democratic. And so almost always the Democratic candidate for president will win the 55 votes from California. That means that it doesn't make very good sense for the Democratic candidate to spend their time visiting California and talking to people about why they should vote for them, because the people of California probably are already going to vote for the Democratic candidate. It also doesn't make a lot of sense for the Republican nominee to go talk to people in California or to spend money buying ads in California for television and newspaper about why people should vote for him or her, because they're really not very likely to do that. And so a state like California, while it looks like it would be a really big prize for a candidate to win, it pretty much always votes Democratic. And so the states where both candidates usually spend the most time and the most energy and the most money campaigning are the states that people call swing states. So those are states where the population is pretty closely divided, maybe 50% Democratic, 50% Republican. And there are about 14 of those states, depending on how you count, places like Ohio and Pennsylvania, where there is a big population and there are a lot of electors. Ohio has 18 electors, I see. In recent history, both Democrats and Republicans have won. My home state of North Carolina is considered a swing state. It has 15 electors. It's not a huge number. It's a pretty conservative state in some ways, but it did vote for for Barack Obama in 2008 when he became the president for the first time. In 2012, North Carolina voted for Obama's opponent. So apparently, North Carolinians didn't think that Obama was doing a very good job. But North Carolina is a swing state. So if you live in North Carolina in a presidential election year, you can expect to get a lot of advertising phone calls and things like that telling you to vote. So now we've made it past the Electoral College, and that's the most complicated part. So now I will speed up. I have a few more slides. So if you can go ahead one more, please. I just wanted to mention here, so the Electoral College does not actually vote until the middle of December. That is on December 17 this year, and usually it's just a formality. And it's even in a regular year, the people don't get together in one big room and vote. They do it already using something like Zoom. So that will work well this year with coronavirus. And then the next slide. So this is a little bit more about strategy. If you can show, these again are the Electoral College, the number of electors from each state. And so one reason the system works the way it does is because, if you take a state like California, I said that California votes heavily Democratic in most years, but that means that maybe 53% of the population, it could be 55%, but probably not, votes for the Democratic candidate. Most of America is a mix. We have a lot of people in America who are more liberal and a lot of people in America who are more conservative. And so even some place like California, the Democratic candidate, if they win, they don't get 80% of the vote. They get 53% of the vote, something like that. But that means that the Democratic candidate gets all 55 of the votes from California in the Electoral College, because that's how all but 2 states work. You only have to get 51% of the vote to win all of the votes from that state. And if you go to the next slide, it's basically the last slide. And that is another reason that we have the 2-party system in the United States, is because you have to have strong parties you have to get 51% of the vote, or at least 50.1% of the vote. You have to get the majority of the vote. If you have a good party and a lot of people like you and you get 48% of the vote, you still get 0 Electoral College votes. So our system actually reinforces the idea that we have just 2 parties. Also, the Electoral College means that a party has to win the votes of states from different regions of the country. So you can't really have a party that only appeals to the South or only appeals to voters from the West, something like that. We have to have big national parties. So I understand now that in the Kyrgyz political system, you have some systems in place or some structures in place to make sure that candidates have support from different regions of the country. You can't have a candidate who's only the candidate from one oblast, for example. And the closest thing we have to that in the American system is the way the Electoral College works, which requires you to have votes from different regions of the country. So there's one more slide, I guess, really, which says, when are the results known? This is sort of like a trick question, partly because we don't know this year. So if you do watch the American elections very closely, you will see that as soon as the polls close, as soon as voting stops in one state, the media starts to make predictions about what the outcome was. And those usually are based on what we call exit polls. So that means that when you go to vote, when you go inside to vote, you have to show your identity card. You have to prove who you are. Usually, it depends on the state, but you have to show who you are, and then you get to vote, and it's secret, and then you leave. And when you're walking out, someone might say, you know, hi, I'm here doing a survey. Do you mind telling me who you voted for? And the outcome of that exit poll is what the media uses to make its best guesses about who's actually winning the election. And so the votes haven't been counted yet, usually. Usually it's a guess based on that information. And historically, that information has been very accurate. The polls in advance of the election are not always very accurate, but the polls on the day of the election saying who did you vote for have historically been very accurate. But again, this year it will be quite different. So many people voted by mail and in advance. It may take longer than usual for the results to be known. There have also been times in the past when there were lawsuits in courts that helped determine the outcome of an election. Like if one party claims that the elections were not fair in one state or in one county, they can sue. So there have been times when the courts were involved in helping to decide the outcome of the election. If you go all the way back in history to the 1800s, there were even 2 times that there was a tie in the Electoral College. 2 candidates had the same number, but that was before we had 50 states. And we don't expect that to happen again. If that does happen, the House of Representatives decides who becomes the president. So often, historically, usually on election day, we think, at least by midnight that night, by the next morning, we think we know who has won the election, but the votes are not officially finished being counted yet. So this year, we can expect it will probably take more time for the votes to be counted. And then after that, of course, as we know, the Electoral College meets in the middle of December, and then Congress certifies the results. That is on January 6th, I think, this year. And then the new president takes office around January the 20th. So that's what you can expect in the coming weeks, or in the next 24 hours, which is, of course, the time of the most suspense, and then in the coming weeks and months. Whoever the new president is, he will be inaugurated in January. So that was my last slide. If you have questions, I would be happy to take them. I'll need Ida's help, of course. Thank you, Ida.
Thank you very much, Emilie, for the interesting question, or for interesting presentation. I'm sorry, and I'm apologizing for the technical issues that occurred during the live. I'm really sorry for that. And that was really interesting because I think now our viewers have the idea how US elections work, and we started to receive questions. And I would like to show the first question.
So the first
the United States is going to hold in spite of the coronavirus.
Yep. So in the year 2016, the last time we had presidential elections, about 140 million people voted. This year, we've already had almost 100 million people vote. So there are a lot of people who didn't want to go stand in line. And I didn't blame them. I told my mom and my dad to vote by mail, because that's something that we can do. And so the reason that so many people have voted already is mostly because of coronavirus. And it will be interesting to see how it changes the timeline for knowing the results of the election. We are trying to have socially distant polling places for where people do go to vote in person. There will be masks, of course. There will be sanitizer and lots of space. Yep.
I see.
I can
Thank you
also
very
say
much, Emilie.
Sure. Go ahead.
The next question, how this year election are different from the ones before in terms of COVID precautions? I think the similar questions everyone is asked.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question. And I think that coronavirus is probably one of the biggest issues also when people are deciding who to vote for. A lot of people have been talking about how the two main candidates have very different policies when it comes to how to manage coronavirus. So it's not just affecting how the elections are run, it may affect the outcome of the elections as well. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Emilie. The next question, can you explain, please, what does swing state mean?
Yep. Sometimes you see a map of America and some of the states are shown as being red and some of the states are shown as being blue. Usually when you see that kind of map, blue means Democratic leaning states and red means Republican leaning states. So the red states are more conservative and the blue states are more liberal or more progressive. But of course, all of America, the map that I like is the map that shows America being sort of purple. And some states are sort of reddish purple, and some states are sort of bluish purple. Because like I said, even in a state that leans heavily one way or another, the outcomes are very close. But there are only about 14 states that are considered to be so close to 50-50 that either candidate has a very good chance of winning. The state that I live in now when I'm in the United States is Virginia. And Virginia is often called a swing state, but according to the polls this year, most people are planning to vote for Biden. So I think that the Biden campaign has not spent a lot of time trying to build support in Virginia. And the Trump campaign has not spent a lot of time trying to build support in Virginia because it's not truly a swing state this year, probably. North Carolina, which is a little bit more conservative, which is my home state, it is truly a swing state. So I'd be happy to guess. I'm guessing that North Carolina will vote for Trump, but it sure will be interesting to see.
It's really interesting to observe it. Thank you very much, Emilie. The next question, when were the first elections held in the United States?
When were the first elections held?
Yes.
That's such an interesting question. And I'm not a very serious historian, so this is a problem for me. The United States declared its independence from Great Britain in 1776 and then fought the War of Independence, the American Revolution. And our Constitution was approved in 1789. And then I think that the first time that George Washington, is it 1788? Whoever asked the question has stumped me. So that means that that whoever I looked it up. I looked it up on my phone, and I'm right. The first presidential election in the United States was in 1788. So
17.
America has had a long time to practice this, and we think that we like to think that our American institutions are very strong. So even when the election is very hard fought, there's a lot of disagreement. This has been a year with a lot of disagreement. We think that the American democratic system is very strong and is able to withstand that kind of strong disagreement. Good question.
So, thank you very much, Emily. The next question, what are kinds of voting technology? How they improved year by year?
Yeah, that's also an interesting question. In my home state of Virginia, I didn't speak clearly about this before. The way it works now is that you do have a piece of paper. So you have your paper ballot and you fill in the circles next to the people that you vote for. And then you put it into a machine and the machine counts, but they also keep the paper ballot. And so there's a check. Like if, for example, the power went out in all of America for 3 days, you could go back and you could check the paper ballots. 10 years ago in Virginia, I think we only used machines. Like we pushed the buttons on the screen, but there was not a paper record. And so that depends on the state. The American federal system of government is very strange to people from a lot of different countries. It's sort of like the German system, but it's very unusual in some ways because we have so much power at the state level. And a lot of that is because the people who founded America, they had just fought a war to be independent from a king who they thought was too far away, not interested in them, not trying to help them. They wanted the power to be closer to home. And so more of the power in our system is at the state level. And so the states run the elections and the states decide what kind of technology to use. There are, I think, 2 states that have voting maybe only by mail, and they've been doing it that way for years, and it's worked really well. So voting by mail has been much more popular this year than ever before. That's mostly it, though, I think, for new technology.
That's interesting. Thank you very much, Emily. The next question, is it possible to commit a fraud in voting by mail?
It could be possible. I'm not an expert on voting by mail, although I did vote by mail this year. So when you vote in person in America, they check your identity, they cross your name off a list, something like that, and then they hand you a piece of paper, and the piece of paper does not say who you are. But you only get the piece of paper if you prove who you are. So the ballots are anonymous. And my state of Virginia uses a similar system where the ballot that you mail them is anonymous, but you have to put it inside an envelope that says who you are. And then you have to put that envelope inside another envelope that is doesn't say who you are. So we have a few layers of protection. No one can tell from looking at the outside of the envelope who it's from. When the election officials open the envelope, they have to check to see who it's from, and then they check your name off. Maybe not a paper list, it's in the computer, but they cross your name off and they say this person voted. And then they have the actual ballot, which doesn't say who you are, but you've already proven who you are through that inside envelope. There's almost no proven voting mail fraud in the United States. We have very little voter fraud in the United States. Sometimes someone maybe might try to vote, using the name of someone who just died or something like that. But it's very isolated, generally speaking. Let's hope that stays the case.
Mhm. Thank you very much, Emily. One more question I'd like to show on the screen. Hello, thank you for the great session. Why can one candidate win the popular vote, but another wins the electoral vote and thus the presidency?
Yeah, it's really strange. In some ways, that happens. So you just have to remember that it's not an accident that it happens that way. It was designed that way on purpose to help to protect the rights of the people in the smaller states, especially, and also to
Mhm,
make sure that a lot of the power stays at the state level, closer to the people. So there was a very recent example of this. There have been two in my lifetime, I think, but in the year 2016, the Democratic candidate for president, Hillary Clinton, did get more popular votes than Donald Trump. But most of her support was from these states like California, New York, states that have really big populations,
mhm,
states that almost always vote Democratic, um, and not the smaller states, which sort of have a little bit more influence in the outcome of the election. If you do look at a map of the United States that shows where the more conservative political base is, where people are who mostly vote more conservatively. A lot of them
mhm,
are in the middle part of the nation, not in the big cities, maybe in states where they have farms, that kind of thing. Maybe not as much economic opportunities, not as many jobs, maybe not as many young people, maybe not as many people with recent immigrant
mhm,
backgrounds, things like that. And then if you look at the East Coast and
mhm,
the West Coast of the United States, that's where the Democrats have the most of their base of support usually. And so those are more like big cities,
mhm,
people who maybe don't have as much experience with being from small towns, people who just have a different kind of life experience in some ways. And so um, the system is designed to make sure that the rights of the people from the smaller states are not uh, taken advantage of by the majority. So it is a strange thing. I think that a lot of people are sort of disappointed when that happens. I don't mean because they want, not necessarily because they want one candidate to win over another candidate, but maybe just because it seems sort of undemocratic. But the people who designed our
mhm,
Constitution designed it this way. The American Constitution has been in place for what, 231 years. It's the oldest written constitution and it's the shortest written constitution. And that's because it's very high level. It doesn't explain who can do what exactly. It just is like principles. And the
mhm,
American Constitution then can be interpreted by our court system. And if the Congress makes a law that the courts decide does not follow the Constitution, then the law is illegal and it's not a law anymore. And it's the same for rules and regulations that the president might make. If they're not consistent with the Constitution, then they are illegal and they're not in place anymore. And so, um,
mhm,
the way the American political system works, the Constitution is our highest law. And this, old fashioned sort of idea has survived for a long time. Maybe that's because it works pretty well. There is an interesting debate in America about whether the system should change,
mhm,
but the American Constitution has only been
mhm.
changed 27 times in the last
Ah,
231 years. So it's probably not going to be
mhm.
changed again anytime soon. That's my guess.
Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you very much for your answer, Emily. Oh,
Thank
it's
you.
kind of food for thought. And one more question. What states vote early and when are these votes counted?
Mm. Well, election day is today in every state. And of course, America's, a big country that has a lot of different time zones. So the very first voting places in the United States are opening very soon. And then they will be open, of course, for the next more than 12 hours. So when we get up in the morning, if you get up early, there will still be people voting in the western part of the United States. But I think that what you mean is about voting in advance, and that depends on the state. And I'm since we have 50 different systems, I'm not an expert enough to say which ones are which way. I know my home state of Virginia let you vote almost 2 months early in person. If you wanted to do it in person. And then the ballots for people who voted by mail got sent out, I think maybe it was 6 weeks early. It was early enough that I was able to print mine and sign mine and mail it away from Bishkek all the way back to Arlington, Virginia. So.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Emily. The next question, how voting works for Americans overseas?
It's different. It's different than many countries because we don't have voting at our embassies at all. We just don't do that. We do voting only by mail. You have to be organized to vote successfully by mail because it takes a long time sometimes for the mail to go across the ocean, especially during COVID time, of course. So American embassies will, we have a mailbox at the American embassy here in Bishkek that American citizens could use to put their ballot into, sealed inside maybe 2 different envelopes to make sure that it's a secret ballot still. But yeah, so the American embassy will mail your ballot back for you as long as you get it to us in enough time. But yeah, we don't run elections at embassies. It's only based on your home state. But every American has to have a home state. It's like where you're registered. So my home state used to be North Carolina because I lived in North Carolina, but now my home state is Virginia because that's where I live when I am in America. And I still pay taxes in Virginia, even now.
Thank you. Thank you for the explanation, Emily. That was our last question for you. Thank you very much, Emily. It was really interesting and very useful session. It was wonderful to have you today. And I know that it's a big day for the United States, and I think everyone is very excited. So thank you very much, everybody, for watching us. And see you in our next session. It's time to say goodbye. Bye-bye, everyone. Have a great day. Have a great evening. And thank you once again, Emily. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for your interest. And thank you, Ida. Bye-bye.